When we started filming this series, we had planned to share a number of positive stories of floodplain management work on farmland across Whatcom County. But in November of 2021, devastating flooding hit the Nooksack Basin.
Now urged to shelter in place and to be ready to evacuate. The worst flooding since 1990.
Floodwaters surged over the banks of the river, inundating the communities of Everson, Nooksack, and Sumas before continuing north into Canada. Further downstream, Linden, Ferndale, and the Lummi Nation also felt the impacts of the flood. As a result, the flip team turned its attention to what is called the Everson flow split with an increased level of urgency, aware of the heightened importance that had been placed on their work by the flooding. The headwaters of the Nooksack River begin around Mount Baker, where they carve rapid channels through the mountains, carrying massive amounts of volcanic sediment. As the river reaches the lowlands, it slows and widens, depositing much of that sediment along the way. As recently as 1,000 years ago, the river flowed along an entirely different course, heading north across the border into Canada, where it joined the Fraser River. Today, it runs in a new path, staying entirely in Washington State and joining the Puget Sound at Bellingham Bay. However, when water levels get too high, the natural course of the river is to flow over the east bank, just south of Everson, where that water follows the path it used to flow, eventually ending up in the Fraser River in British Columbia, Canada. We joined the mayor of Everson to learn more about the November 2021 flooding. Hey, John.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. Thanks for meeting with me today. I was just hoping to learn a little bit more about the impacts of the flood on the city and maybe talk about what the future might hold.
Perfect. I can help you with that.
Great. So last year's flooding was at historic levels. How much warning did the city have that the floodwaters were going to come?
We had about a week's notice that we were going to get some level of flooding. We weren't sure to what extent. And as we got closer, the predictions kept ramping up. We were sandbagging, we were getting our barricades set up, but we weren't thinking evacuations at that point because we didn't realize how big of an event it would actually be.
How many homes were impacted?
We had in Everson about 300 homes. It got some level of water in it, either ductwork all the way up to 3 or 4 feet of water inside the home. As most people know, we had one fatality here in town, which is tragic, and that's one of the things we want to avoid in the future. It impacted almost every aspect of the community, from our wastewater treatment plant going offline to, there was no power here. Our police department was involved in probably 50 or 60 rescues. Local citizens, Mike Breivik for one, he was involved helping at least 40 or 50 people out of their homes with his front end loader. Yeah, the sheer impact to the community during the event was like nothing I've seen before. It was a tough time to go through.
So in terms of flood management and prevention, what does the future hold for Everson?
We're working with Whatcom County on several different things that can help mitigate the impacts in these large floods. We're exploring options like levee setbacks, ring dikes around Everson and Nooksack, as well as more analysis of what we're seeing in the Nooksack River, whether sediment buildup is causing some of these more serious events, or if it's just the sheer volume of water that we're seeing. So there's things that we can do that will help the community withstand these larger flood events.
So is the future still bright for Everson then?
Definitely. We've got a great community out here. I've got a great staff that's helping the community go through the recovery process. And we've got some things we're working on that will help mitigate future flood events. And so I definitely think it's bright.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming out. I'm here with Paula Harris, River and Flood Manager for Whatcom County Public Works. Paula, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for inviting me out.
So I've had the opportunity to talk to a whole bunch of landowners and engineers and other stakeholders about the floodplain integrated planning system. How has the change to the FLIP model changed the way that River and Flood does its work?
It's really a paradigm shift in terms of river management. In the old days, we as engineers were driving the train. We were developing ideas, packaging them into different alternatives, analyzing them, and coming up with what we thought was the best solutions, and then taking that out into the public. And sometimes they didn't agree with us. So this new paradigm is really where we're bringing all the key interests, including landowners and community representatives, to the table from the very beginning, and giving them the information they need to understand the complexities of this river system, and working with them and taking their ideas that they generate and bringing them into the suite of things that we look at. So it's really a big change in terms of how we're doing things now.
So can that be challenging then if you've got the needs of landowners, the needs of fish and habitat, flood management? How can you incorporate all of those different interests?
Yes, it is definitely challenging. My mom always said, when are you going to learn some patience? And I think the time is now. It's very, very challenging, but really rewarding when you can get all these different interests to see each other's perspective and ultimately work together to come up with solutions. So it's kind of fun, actually, in a lot of ways.
When we look at like the flooding that we had in November of 2021, how does the flip process change the way you respond to something like that?
I think it's actually provided a bit of an opportunity for us to really focus on this flow split issue. Upstream of the Everson Bridge, there is basically a natural high bank with no levees on it. And when the river gets high enough to overtop that high bank, it typically goes over Emerson Road and then flows up through that old historic flow path where people now live and farm.
So basically, whenever the river flow is high enough, some water is naturally going to flow outside of the river bed through Everson, Nooksack, Sumas, and then up into Canada.
Yeah, once it's over Emerson Road, it's not getting back into the Nooksack. We did a lot of work in the early 2000s on this flow split issue in terms of trying to understand the complexities of this river, and we made a lot of progress. But over the past 10 years or so, we've kind of been pulled in a lot of different directions. And so I think that this flood and the impacts that it caused to our community really allowed us to refocus our energy and really focus on this technical work that really is the key next step in terms of coming up with a long-term vision to reduce the impacts of flooding to our communities.
How do you manage a flow split like that?
That's really the work that we're getting into in a big way right now, trying to develop these tools that we can use to analyze a bunch of these different ideas that were generated at the meeting we had in April, and really see if those different ideas really make a difference in terms of flood levels, and then try and package them up in a way that accomplishes the best for everyone and doesn't put anybody else more in harm's way than they already are.
So can you talk about the difference between short-term and long-term work at the flow split and what that might look like?
Yeah, so we had this design charrette meeting back in April where we had about 50 people from the community come and generate ideas. And one of the buckets of work that came out of that design charrette is early action projects. And for this area of the river, one of the ideas was to try and increase conveyance or the ability of the river to move water upstream of that Everson Bridge. And there's a side channel that flows along the Twin View levee that was kind of high, filled up with gravel. And so the community kind of worked together to develop this project where we could lower the elevation of the inlet of that channel and get some of the roughness out of there to try and promote the river to get in there at lower flow rates and do some work and open up that channel and create conveyance in kind of a natural process type of way.
I'm Travis Bama with Whatcom County River and Flood Division, and I was the lead inspector for the Everson pilot project. It's basically just opening up a side channel to help move sediment through the system. When the river comes out, it will naturally start taking that inlet and working it and then flow down here and hopefully encourage the river to move some of this material downriver and create habitat at the same time. This project came about as part of the Nooksack River flood integrated planning process, where we were looking for opportunities, an early action project that we could potentially do this year. It's a pilot project, so we can look at and study and see if it could work elsewhere or at a larger scale, smaller scale. Getting these sediment plugs that are causing issues with capacity help move those through the system naturally in certain spots where it makes the most sense scientifically.
Long-term projects, on the other hand, take a lot longer to develop. With this new paradigm, we need to bring all the community together. You know, we have to work with Canada as well, because whatever we do down here will affect them up there. So this one's not only a community-driven process, but it's going to have to overlap with an internationally driven process, and hopefully those will align, and we can ultimately build a system of flood infrastructure that will work on both sides of the border.
Well, thank you so much for coming out today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really looking forward to seeing how we can build a flood-resilient community out here. At the time of this filming, the modeling process used to evaluate potential projects is still ongoing. We know from recent devastating fish die-offs, along with what Mayor Perry just told us, that there is a high cost to inaction. We also know that wrong action can be equally or more devastating. The change from a piecemeal approach to floodplain problem solving, like at Duffner Ditch, to a process like that at Cougar Creek that involves integrated solutions is a stark improvement. The goal is to arrive at actions that provide floodplain improvements for farms, fish, and the whole community. While there is an effective process in place to do that, and efforts are being scaled up, there is still a lot of work to be done and investment to be made. But after talking to people and learning more about the FLIP process, I remain hopeful and excited that our goals will be reached.